Hello, Mage fans. This is Terry Robinson with Mage the Podcast, and before I get to the second set of interviews that I did at GenCon 2019, I wanted to do an update on a number of projects that Mage the Podcast has in the works. First off, Duplicity, the online Twitter chronicle that Ira Grace is running, has finished out its third week, and recaps are now available at magethepodcast.com. If you'd rather not track the individual tweets and just want to see a summary of what's happened during the week in that chronicle, go to magethepodcast.com. That will also have links if you are interested in following the Twitter blow-by-blow, as well as how to get in contact with Ira if you have any questions. Second, friend of the show, Charles Siegel, author of Enlightened Grimoire and Mystic Armory, has released a book on nodes, which I got to contribute to. It is called Sources of Magick, and if you get it through the link on magethepodcast.com, we get a small cut of the proceeds from that. So, again, thank you for buying stuff through our page. Next up, this is a soft announcement for a project that Mage the Podcast is shooting to finish through winter of 2020, which is a set of instructional audio and video materials for how to learn Mage. We get a lot of questions in the Discord and on the Facebook group of how to actually play the darn game, and we'd like to try and fill that in with some media. If those projects go well, we plan on expanding that to a My First Chronicle, which I'm tentatively entitling Ready Set Paradox, which will probably get a vastly better name once people who are better at branding than I am get their hands upon it. Look for updates regarding that, but we'll see where it goes. If you're interested in contributing or you're interested in seeing how that develops, as always, follow at Mage the Podcast on Twitter. Drop us a line at magethepodcast@gmail.com and join our Discord server. A link is available from our webpage. The Discord server has been an absolute hoot, at least for me. I've found it a lovely way to be able to engage with other fans of Mage the Podcast. So today's three interviews are, first, an interview with Victor Kinzer of Walking Away from Arcadia on political systems and how they can be introduced into Mage, as well as a few other thoughts he has as to the state of Changeling, as to the state of White Wolf, and as to the state of GenCon. After that, I have an interview with Carol Darnell. She is an editor for Mage and has a lot of very good advice on writing your own supplements and how to get started producing your own materials that you're going to pass to other people. Rounding out the interview set, I talk with Matt Webb from Jackalope Live Action Studios on his upcoming Elysium Chronicle, which is going to be a large prestige LARP series, as well as his thoughts on the state of Mage and what we can do to get the game out there. It's a very wide-ranging conversation, as many of the talks with Matt are, and I hope you enjoy it. This is the last episode that includes all of the GenCon interviews. Our upcoming interviews involve a conversation with Monica Specca of Bonus Experience and a developer for Onyx Path on how to add homebrew changes to your games. We are continuing to talk about crossovers with Old World of Darkness systems, and as always, we're going to continue the Tomes of Magic series. Going forward, there are a few new series that I hope to get started. One is going to be crossovers, or things at least you can steal from non-Old World of Darkness games, maybe Chronicles of Darkness or things a little bit further afield. And in addition to that, two series that I'm going to call Paradigm Deep Dives, which is a more thorough exploration of a particular paradigm or worldview and how it manifests in Mage. And finally, Enemies of Ascension, which is a look at antagonists that you can steal from other games or from around the Old World of Darkness that fit particularly well into Mage the Ascension. And with that, on with the show. Hi, Mage fans. This is Terry Robinson reporting on location at GenCon in Indianapolis, Indiana, with noted friend of the show, Victor P. Kinzer. I don't actually know what his middle name is, and we will keep that quiet, as that will give you additional information to divining his true name.
Oh, that would be terrible.
It would be. It would be problematic. Victor is one of the brains behind the consummately well-crafted Walking Away from Arcadia, a Phoenix Rising, or The Phoenix Rising, or The Phoenix Rising, a Chronicle Jumpstart for M20, which is, I think, the most popular Chronicle Jumpstart at current. Besides correcting me on either your name or what you have done, how are you doing, Victor?
I'm doing well. I'm having a great GenCon.
Hooray!
Yeah, it's always nice to come here. I imagine there might be a few people who are disappointed by this, but I took a break, and I'm not running games this year, so I'm getting to just be at the Chronicle and come and meet and talk with people like you and see people and view the floor. It's been fantastic.
But when we do the 8-hour Mage block of content at Midwinter, you're going to have your storyteller pants on, or at least your skilled commentator pants on for some of that.
That's fair. I will also be staying at the hotel that's connected to the con if I need to go rest.
Okay.
That's hard at GenCon.
Yes.
We're like way out on the fringe because that's what happens at GenCon.
I'm staying 3 miles away, which I heard was billed as GenCon walking distance.
Yeah, pretty much. That sounds right.
So how is Walking Away from Arcadia doing, or how are your other Mage projects going?
Walking Away from Arcadia is kind of like soft back on. I'm sure people who are listeners have noticed we're definitely not doing regular episodes anymore. We kind of had a plan when we started the podcast. We knew the major topics we wanted to touch on, and that plan expanded over time. And when we went on our hiatus, we sort of hit the end of that plan. And so now when we come up with topics, when something hits us, when a new book comes out, we can get an interview, we do an episode, but it's not that regular schedule thing. And just as a matter of like life balance, it's probably not going to be. I'm trying to do more podcast things with other producers like Mage the Podcast to sort of fill that in. We do have an episode that's being worked on right now. I've done initial cleanup. It's with Simon. He has to do some post-production stuff, but I'm excited about getting that one out. It's about horror and changelings specifically, which is a topic we touched on at the beginning and is always kind of sprinkled through our episodes, but I thought it would be interesting to just dive into it. The thing that's making this one take a little longer is instead of our regular fiction piece, we were going to do another Beyond the Mists, and that project just got away from us. It was way too big. It was way more ambitious than the first one, but we have some snippets that we completed. And so Simon's doing actual radio play post-production on one of those to be the fiction piece at the beginning. So I'm excited about this episode. It's just taking longer than normal.
Understood. I look forward to hearing an episode that is not simply a book review. Your deep dives and criticisms into form and style, I think, are something that few other podcasts can touch in terms of quality.
Well,
and I finally got to compliment you face to face, gazing through my glasses, through your glasses, and into each other's eyes. And now I'm blushing slightly. But anyway, so what are you playing here?
So I played a game of They Came From Beneath the Sea, which was the most fun thing I have done in I don't know how long.
What is that game?
So They Came From Beneath the Sea is B-grade, flip side kind of horror as a story path game. So it's an Onyx Path game, and you are playing these characters, and it's not just that's kind of the genre. You are sort of actually on stage. You're making that movie, and so some of the functions you get are rewrites or cut scene. They're things that are very, very cinematic, and it's a game that just invites you to be ridiculous, and we had so much fun playing that game.
Yeah, it's a game that introduces meta-narrative elements, which other games have toyed around with, but this goes full on.
Yes,
in that you have that recut. One of them is replaced with extra, where if your character would suffer lethal damage, they can just say it was actually a stunt double or someone else.
We played that 5 times during the game. We just kept redrawing it, and we decided that this was such a low-budget movie that every single extra was played by the same woman named Susan, and she was the director. She couldn't afford extras, and so every time we played that card, it was Susan has jumped into another outfit. It was just so much fun.
I got to play my first game of Scion, second edition. I was a big fan of Scion first edition. It's kind of funny. I've now played as much Mage as I have Scion and Promethean the Created, all about 4.5 hours of each. So I need to work on that. Anything besides They Came From?
Yeah, I'm going to be playing a game later today that's actually going to be run, I hope he doesn't get mad at me, by one of the Changeling writers, but he's running a game called Threadless. I only know a little bit about it.
Is that the one where you work for a food delivery service? Or
No, okay. No. You are broken toys in a broken world trying to fix yourself. And the art in it is all of these chopped up toys that have been put back together in different configurations and photographed. There's a special bonus if you make the character you play. So go out to Goodwill, find some toys, rip them up and reconstruct them.
That's the best way to do bonus XP.
I know. And so all I have is the pitch. I don't know how to play the game yet. It's going to be taught at the table, but I'm super excited about that game.
It is interesting in the craft of role-playing games that storytelling itself hasn't made a lot of changes, it seems, in the
past couple millennia,
Yeah.
but mechanics and how to reduce ludonarrative dissonance, the gap between the game and the theme, seems to keep shrinking, and I certainly appreciate that. So fingers crossed for an M5 that can kind of tighten up some of those things.
Yeah, I'm excited about what could come from an M5. A game where it's like, okay, yes, we're just taking this to the next level. M20 tried to update things, but had to also be that like love letter to the current game.
Yes.
There's just a lot of things that needed to be at the same time. And I'm super excited for the idea of an edition that's just a clear, what is the next iteration of this game done?
Yeah. And again, it's a role-playing game, as I am fond of putting it when I get into arguments about this. When people say, oh, I just want the next book in the M20 line, my response is usually, you already have 75 of those. Let's have a few more for everyone else.
I will say there's some content coming for the M20 line that is more than that.
Okay.
Book of the Fallen in particular, if you've seen Phil talk about it at all online, he's taking a very different view of the Fallen. And so the systems, they're going to be M20 systems,
yeah.
but I feel like that Victorian Mage is really going to fill in a huge part of the canon that had never been filled in before. And I think those will all be useful when we get to M5 still. Those are books that I'm still going to tap.
Got it. And again, Mage is a game that takes place with humans in history.
Yeah.
So if you want I think my most common source book at current is either Wikipedia or Graceful Wicked Masks, but let's not tell my players about that. One of the projects I am working on, and in that you are wise and insightful, I wanted to kind of pick your brain about, was in Mage we have the Metaphysical Trinity. We have entropy, stasis, and dynamism. And generally the traditions represent a balance of those three forces.
Yes.
That even individual traditions may hew more close to one of those. I think one of my favorite lines in first edition Euthanatos was the Euthanatos talking about Sons of Ether. We're skeptical of each other. To them, we are half Nefandi, and to us, they are half technocrat.
Yeah.
And you have the Marauders that line up with dynamism, the technocracy that lines up with stasis, and you have the Nefandi that line up with entropy. If we wanted to change those factions, what could we do? And here is my first thought, and I would love your opinion on it, is, so to me, the difference between a Marauder and a Tradition Mage is a difference of degree, not necessarily a difference of kind.
Yes, I agree with that.
So we take the traditions, and this would be a game where you probably would not be playing a traditional person. We move them to the dynamism spot. So the Council of the Nine is now this throwback. The technocracy takes on the balance role in that we loosen up the technocracy a little bit. We make them a little more virtual adept, a little more Sons of Ether. And now this opens up the stasis spot.
So it's funny that you mentioned that, because the thing I've been thinking, when you mentioned earlier about, factions in the Ascension War, something I've been really chewing on is I want to know where anarchists fit in Mage. Because right now in Mage, you have all these mystic traditions.
Okay.
Nefandi, the traditions, the disparates, you name it, they're all fundamentally bounded in mysticism.
Okay.
And then you have the technocrats who are like autocratic, stasis, not bound in mysticism at all, and a lot of like societal paradigms there, democracy and economy. But like Emma Goldman was a thing, and actual anarchism was a thing, and it never really went away.
Can you give a functional definition of anarchism for our audience?
Okay, so anarchism is a point of view that systems of power do not have intrinsic value. And you have extreme anarchists who are like tear down all sources of, institutional sources of power. But most anarchists, anarcho-syndicalism, if you look up, I can't think of his name, he's constantly talking.
Noam Chomsky.
Noam Chomsky, yes, you picked it up perfectly. This idea that, okay, we have to have some structures in society, but they should have to justify themselves. That's the way he always describes it.
And justify themselves continually.
Continually, over time. Do I still add value? It's some version of, I see a vision of how humanity can be organized that doesn't involve autocracy.
Okay.
Basically at all. Antifa is generally part of anarchism, often on the more extremist side, but, not always. It depends on how it manifests. But then in Mage, you have mystics and autocrats and not in between. And I'm like, no.
Yeah. In the same way that if I reworked things, the technocracy would become much more cell-based. There would not be a control. There would be a coordinating committee, as it were.
Okay.
I know that's a loaded term, but in the same way that... So one of the questions I always have about the traditions is, are the heads of the traditions, the primi, are they governors or are they senators? In a governor model, they control their tradition, and then they talk with the other traditions to coordinate action, but they don't know dick to anyone else unless they decide to.
Yeah.
In a senator model, they merely represent their tradition, really have no express power over it, but they do have very explicit power within this centralized federal body that is the Nine Mystical Traditions as an organization. And we have some manifestation of both. The Rinpoche for the Euthanatoi very much is the leader of it, with the weird exception of Senex, who probably just chooses not to be the primus. But still, it is an organization that all kind of look to those two figures for direction. And the Rinpoche, is very much a senatorial figure, and Senex is very much a governor figure. And other traditions have that to more or less varying degrees. So when you're talking about the gulf between there, what would that look like? You talk about the autocracy mysticism. Are you looking for anarchist technocrats and institutionalist mystics or something else?
So I'm looking for anarchist technomancers.
Okay.
So I am awakened. I have an avatar. I am driven towards this vision of a flat, organized society. I have paradigm and mechanism and instrument to enact that will on reality, but I'm not a mystic. And I'm a working mage. We have the model for like how a non-mystic working mage works in the technocracy, but what does a totally anti-autocratic version of that look like? Because its absence in the world doesn't make any sense.
And you don't feel that, for instance, the jockeying for social position but very little explicit position within the virtual adepts doesn't quite fill that space?
Yeah, so I had this conversation on a Facebook group recently. My
condolences.
It wasn't bad. It wasn't bad, actually. The virtual adepts do definitely hold some of this.
Okay.
But I've recently been kind of exploring anarchist groups and socialist groups just out of curiosity and finding out what does that part of the world look like. And, well, you definitely have like the anonymous phenomenon, which is anarchists, virtual adepts. Okay, good, that fits. You also have a lot of like their paradigm is very much about societal structure. It's not about the computer. The computer might be a tool they use to like get the word out, but that's not the paradigm. It's like, there are men in black who work deeply in the digital web, but they're in the Men in Black, not in Iteration X, because their paradigm is societal.
Okay.
And I want a place for those mages.
Closest, I guess, the VAs get would be the reality hackers and their enjoyment of social engineering. But even then, their goal is to just jockey within systems of power and not necessarily to eradicate them.
Correct, yes.
He even pointed at me, and that was one of the most life-affirming moments of my life. I'm just putting that out there.
That's just a gesticulation that I do.
Don't ruin this for me.
Okay, I won't.
Do you have anything more that you'd like to say about that? I guess the autocratic mystical thing is pretty well already ironed out in terms of the Celestial Chorus and the Order of Hermes, depending on the era and and how strict you want to be.
Yeah, I feel like if you open up the Disparate Alliance, there's a little bit more space for some of this.
Okay.
When you look at and I hope I pronounced this correctly, the Sisters of Hippolyta, that was in the M20 core book, that was clearly like drawn after protest. That wasn't drawn after
very
like
clearly shown in the art of the person holding the protest sign that says, "Don't believe their lies," being hit by tear gas.
Yes, and so I think, and again, in the limitation, M20 had to be a love letter to the existing mage, so it could only break the mold so much. I think the Disparate Alliance did a good job at inviting in some of that, but it invited it into a space that also had mysticism. And not that I love that that's there. I just also want there to be like the anarchist technomancer somewhere.
Mage is often not the book, not the system that one looks to for politics. If it is medium group politics, I always think of werewolf. If it's large group politics, I always think of vampire. What do you feel the unique venue that Mage brings onto the scene is that those other games don't, besides the fact that you've got magic powers?
I think the thing that's unique about Mage, and the place where I think Mage can shine with politics, is you're trying to change the world. So you don't get wrapped up in like the person-to-person politics the way you do in Vampire. It's all about the relationship. It's, I have this vision of the world, and I'm going to go out there and I'm going to make the world that vision. Other people happen to have different visions of the world, and you end up clashing. There's nothing more political than that. Because it's not always fireballs in the street. It can't be. It's, if you play that Ascension vision, which not everybody does. A lot of people play more urban fantasy mage, and that's legit. You know, I think the true Ascension vision is a little harder to grapple with. You have to have people that have at least at some point in their life kind of been in those positions. I've sat on a union board. I've done big union board negotiations. I work in a job where I'm like wrapped up in this level of changing the world and the way other people are doing it. So like that crackles in my brain.
Okay.
So I think Mage does open that up uniquely among the World of Darkness games.
I find it fascinating because you and I have talked before about the unity of purpose that comes from a principles-based organization, but also the effectiveness that comes from a rules-based organization, and the fact that it is very hard to scale principles or to make rules efficacious in a positive way that is not just mindlessly pursuing orthodoxy.
Yep.
I have spent much of my life volunteering with the Boy Scouts, so that has always been my standard. Like, of course you can make a large principles-based organization that propagates rules, but then again, remember at the end of the day, we're fundamentally working with like kids and teenagers, and that's kind of a fundamentally different beast. So
yeah, the thing that really drove that home for me, like I said, I've been exploring socialist and anarchist organizations. Like, what is this really? Because you get like a baseline when you're younger. There was a socialist convention in Chicago that I found out because of the Haymarket. It happens every year in Chicago.
Hey, that makes sense. Would you like to take a moment to explain what the Haymarket Massacre, I assume, was?
So the Haymarket Affair, also known as the Haymarket Massacre, it happened after a bombing that took place after a labor demonstration May 4th, 1886. So to land this in Mage terms, if you were playing this would have been right before the Victorian reorganization. Yes. This would have been like the Albarian reorganization when it was pretty clear that wasn't going to work, but oh God, what are we going to do about it? So that kind of fits. It happened in Haymarket Square in Chicago. It started as a peaceful rally, again, tied into the labor movement, and it was part of the strike for 8-hour workday. And there were clashes with the police, and the police killed 8 workers, which was a very big deal, and it was a big moment in like early activism and labor.
And part of the reason that we are the only country of literally every country that exists that does not celebrate International Workers' Day, which I find to be interesting.
Yeah.
So,
but anyway, there was this socialist convention, and I went, I didn't even know that was a thing, and it looked polished. And I'm like, I have to see what this is about. So I found out about like a week before it happened, so I just went for Saturday. And it was an experience. There was a lot of great content, but like everyone referred to everyone else as comrade. And I was not prepared for that. Oh, like I walked in and I was like, oh wow, is it still, what year is this? You know, and I got to meet a couple of the socialist city council members that had been elected to Chicago. There were a lot of interesting things going on, but it was very much a lesson in when you're principles-based, you can only scale so far. Because it was clear people they wanted the freeness of what they were fighting for, and I respect that, but there's an organizational limit to that. It was weird to see. I still don't know how I feel about it.
Yeah, and I am much more used to organizations where I become a leader, not because I step forward, but everyone steps back, and they're like, we'll just listen to Terry.
I've seen that as well.
Yes. I'm normally on the other side of that, so that was fascinating. Do you think there should be systems for politics in Mage? Do you think, is there another game that does that particularly well that one could look to, or is this a supplement that you would like to write?
So I don't know that I can say this is particularly well, and I saw that supplement you'd like to write. I see you. But this is brand new, so I haven't gotten to play with it yet. But Changeling and the Changeling Player's Guide recently introduced a politics system.
Okay.
And I think it's a system that could work for any game.
Can you give a bit of an overview of what it looks like?
Yeah, I haven't played with it yet, so keep that in mind.
Listen to Victor's lovely review of it at Walking Away from Arcadia episode.
We do talk about it a little bit in the Changeling Player's Guide episode.
I think the title of that episode was they finally fixed the shadow cord or something like that.
Yeah. Oh, yes. But anyway, they put this system in place where you can enact political actions and you roll on them, and they kind of go out, and the storyteller's like, okay, this is how this is going to affect the story in a longer sense, and then other people can also take those actions, and you can like gather resources and build up an action and sort of prep it and stage it to succeed. Again, it's brand new. I've never seen anything like that in the World of Darkness, and I haven't played with it yet, but I want to.
It sounds like one of those systems where sure, people say they want to role play through everything, but it's one of those things where how many backdoor meetings and how many campaign speeches do you want to role play through? So instead, you say to your storyteller, here are my bullet points of why I want this to change. These are some of the avenues I would take to do it, and now let's reduce it to a role.
Yeah, and I honestly think for games like Changeling and Mage, that's a really good system. I'd really love to use this system in Mage. In Vampire and Werewolf, and to an extent if you play Political Wraith, I wouldn't want to use that system because the nitty-gritty matters.
Yes, it collapses too much.
Yeah, but those politics are also so often about positioning yourself for power. It's about you.
Okay.
If you're in a game where it's about the goal, it's about the playing ground, which in Mage is Ascension, you're driven by your avatar. In Changeling, it's shaping combat.
Yeah.
Like it's that echo of that thing that the Fae are drawn to, but they can't quite do it properly anymore. And so I think for those two games, having the goal is changing the playground. It's about making a different game board. It's not about me. I think a system like that is really important because you don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of that.
And the hierarchy in Wraith is probably the embodiment of an organization that no longer really does anything and just consists of people jockeying for power as it becomes a kind of pseudo-fetter.
Absolutely.
An attachment in the afterlife. Well, that's fascinating. And the Changeling Player's Guide is available, I imagine, through Drive-Thru RPG, and I think it's now available on print on demand.
It is. I have a shiny copy on my shelf. I'm so excited.
Moment of silence for the day in which we can once again get beautiful case-bound, offset printed copies.
Yeah.
Victor and I were both in the What's Onyx Path Up To session, and one of the people in the audience said, like, print on demand sucks. And I had a fist held skyward near my head in solidarity as a hobbyist bookbinder. But we're getting there. There. So any other thing you're looking forward to the weekend or any other projects you'd like to share with our audience?
I'll share quickly a project I'm working on with Simon. For those who know Walking Away from Arcadia, it's a book for the Storyteller's Vault that we're probably still going to be hacking at for a while because of life and work issues, but it sort of brings back the old school Dantean in a way that makes sense in C20.
What does that mean?
So Dantean are banal changelings, and they were written awkwardly in first edition, but it's first edition, a lot of things were awkward. And when they released C20, they looked at them and they went, well, they're kind of half just boogeymen changelings, they're kind of half banal changelings, we need to pick one of these, and they went with boogeyman changelings. And it's very well written, and I love it, but it left the banal, like, I'm old and I've been tainted by banality, but I'm not undone yet, so I'm dangerous to other changelings. It left that out. And so I sort of tried to tackle making that make sense, because it didn't make sense in the original book so much.
And it seems like the Thalane, who are the dreams of the Fomorians?
Those are the Thalane.
Yeah.
And they're still glamorous. I mean, they're not anti-dreaming, they're just nightmares.
They can be your boogeymen as well.
They
so
can,
now we
yes.
seemingly have two different types of boogeymen.
Two different, yes.
So you have both
different.
the technocracy and Nefandi, as it were, yes.
Yes, exactly. And then another part of the book Simon's working on is Fimblespring. We talked a little bit about this in our last episode. The Fimblespring are changelings who have been undone, and so they're never going to be changelings again, except then they end up with one of the diseases of age that degrades your identity and leads to dementia. Obviously, the most stereotypical will be Alzheimer's, but there are others. And the idea of what happens if that happens to a changeling and the human that keeps them anchored completely melts away and leaves this unfettered fae thing that hasn't reincarnated, and what does that look like?
It sounds
I think
like
it's brilliant.
Not quite Bedlam, or is that fundamentally different?
It's not Bedlam. Bedlam is a little bit different, but it definitely has similarities to Bedlam.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there's a third chapter that focuses, and then we were kind of looking at all end of life, that really piquing that changeling fear of death, because it's all kind of a reflection of that. There's a chapter with a couple death kiths, because we both always wanted there to be more death kiths. Changeling was very much originally conceived as kind of the bright, shiny fairy in the glade, and then, you have the Slua. But if you look at the actual myths about the Fae, a lot of them are tied to death. So we wanted to flesh that out a little bit. Do not know when it will be coming out, but we're
we should
hacking
expect
at it.
In eventually.
Eventually, yes.
The Simon Eichhorn canon is slow to evolve, but well, thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to talking to you at least when we finally get around to reviewing Isle of Might or Isle of the Mighty. I can never remember the name.
Isle of the Mighty, I think it is. And thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Gladly.
Thank you.
Hi, Mage the Podcast. This is Terry Robinson, and I have the distinct pleasure of talking with Carol Darnell, a accomplished freelance editor who's worked on a number of works you may have heard of. Carol, what have you worked on?
I have worked on Book of Secrets and the Mage Cookbook, and I hope to work on some more of them and more books in the future. For Onyx Path in general, I've also worked on Vampire, I've worked on Lore of the Clans. I've worked on some anthologies, including Changeling the Dreaming, or Changeling 20th Anniversary, and Changeling the Lost. I have worked on Book of the Worm,
nice.
all of the different lines. Mostly I've done a lot of work for Mummy, I've done some work for. So yeah.
Thank you. Well, pardon my ignorance, but what does a editor for a RPG rules and setting book do?
Well, it is. I was actually just talking to someone about this being kind of a niche. It's a specialized thing, because not only do you have to follow the rules of grammar, you have to know when to break them due to tone and the examples and the fiction, but also every publisher has their own style guide, generally, and the rules have their own structure. So you have to make sure that the rules are absolutely consistent and that they follow a correct format and that they make sense. So, and generally there are mechanics editors as well, who specialize in that. I do a little of both. So usually by the time it gets to me, that's gone through the mechanics editor, and I might find a missing apostrophe or in the wrong place, just where that hadn't been caught. But that punctuation in rules can make a big difference in how they are interpreted. You also have to, so sometimes there's multiple passes because what you're trying to do is make the game accessible, and as clean as possible.
When you do those editing passes, do you just dedicate each pass to something like, I'm going to read through for punctuation, I'm going to read through for voice and tone, I'm going to...
At this point, no.
Okay.
I usually do at least two. One, because if I see a problem that seems to be very consistent, like there was someone who the writer misunderstood something, I will stop and try to fix all that.
Okay.
And then I will go back through and do the rest, like punctuation, and you are using different, you are focusing on different things. So sometimes if it seems like the punctuation is being misused a lot, I will focus on that first. It really depends on the text.
Now, do you wind up ever giving your feedback regarding rules or mechanics? You've listed a bunch of games that you've worked on, and in the conversation beforehand, you've seemingly ran and GM'd 24 different game systems. Like, at this point, you're an RPG expert, seemingly, as well. Do you ever get feedback regarding that?
Once or twice.
Okay.
Because, as I said, there's usually a mechanics editor who's looked at before me.
Okay.
If I do see something that seems off or imbalanced, I will say something.
Okay.
And I've never been chastised for it,
Nice.
so I guess I'm doing okay.
Now, we have a number of listeners that have submitted works to the Storytellers Vault or Storypath Nexus or any other community content forum. Besides hiring you, and we will include your contact information with this episode, what are the recommendations you have to people who are either looking for an editor for the first time or trying to figure out what they need to do before they hand a work off to an editor?
Before you hand a work off to an editor, I'm going to take that one first. Spell check.
Does that include like having a big list of words that are capitalized in that system?
Yes.
Okay.
Generally, a style guide from a publisher, and I also do make style guides because not every publisher has one before they do their first or second book. Sometimes they think they don't need it because, well, if they're the only ones working on it, then they know what they need.
Yeah.
In games, especially in games where you are creating terms, especially for smaller publishers, consistency with those is so important because nothing turns a potential GM or a player off to go, well, it was this 5 pages ago, but now you're saying it's this term, and it just confuses people. So consistency is so very important, which is why, as an editor, I will often go back and say, hey, you use this term and then this term. Which one do you want prevalent? Which one are you actually going to use? I sometimes will pick the one that's more prevalent and say, is this what you meant? I try to be polite about it, But also, when you're looking for an editor, you want someone who is hopefully familiar with the system so they can at least catch if there's a glaring error there. If they are not well versed in the rules, it doesn't mean you don't want them, but you may want to give them more guidance on what to pay attention for in the rules. And then when you talk to them about what you want them to do, are they talking about making sure tone is consistent, not just terms? And as far as finding one, we don't have a central group. Most of my business has always been, hey, I referred you to so-and-so. Or, hey, so-and-so referred me to you. So
not everyone has the pleasure of just making your acquaintance in the lobby of a large hotel. So when the Book of Knobs is getting ready to come out, I
Thank
look
you.
forward to a medium-sized check being cut for you and some editing being done.
Awesome. I look forward to it. I really do. I love editing and not because I'm like obsessive or, whatever, but I love all the stories that we tell with these games. And if I can help someone be more clear so the most number of people can enjoy them, then yes, absolutely.
This may be a weird question, but have you noticed any trends in how RPGs are being written that's maybe changed over the length of time that you've been doing this? For instance, I recently picked up Invisible Sun, and I thought it was interesting that all the abilities were in first person. That a spell would say, I cast this spell and I gain 3 additional health, and for the next 2 rounds I get +2 armor, as opposed to it being in third person or second person.
I've actually not seen that before.
Okay.
The first person. I do know that some publishers, when they're speaking of what the character does, they're very specific about that. One thing that's been consistent is always making a hard barrier between player and character. Because it's very important, to make that distinction. So, no, I haven't noticed anything really like that. I mean, every publisher has their own, but
Okay.
it tends to be, you do this. And then some publishers are like, no, absolutely not. You're not going to use you at all. They do this. The player does that. The character does this, and just do it that way. As an editor, you try to follow the style guide as much as possible and just make sure that everything is what they want, because that's what they're hiring you to do. Make it clear the way they want it. I have noticed that, and I'm happy about this, is that a lot of publishers are going to the singular they, and a lot of publishers are being mindfully more inclusive. So those are 2 trends that I'm happy to be a part of.
To ask you a personal question, how do you feel about the Oxford comma?
Oh. Well, not everyone agrees with me, but I am an Oxford comma fan.
It adds clarity, in my opinion. It's good to know that we're on the same page regarding that.
And I've heard the arguments. As a matter of fact, my husband and I don't quite agree on this. He thinks it's extraneous. He thinks it's not necessary because the and takes care of that. I disagree. I think that there are still ways that sentences can be written in the shortest possible way, that if you don't use that comma, that and will still be confusing. So, the war rages on.
Understood. And for people who are writing their first supplement, who maybe haven't gotten to the point where they feel comfortable, they haven't moved enough copies that they feel comfortable hiring an editor, or it's going to be something that they're doing for free, do you have any recommendations for what people to do when they're either self-editing or doing an editing pass for a friend? Is it one of those things where, hey, grab a style guide that already exists, and if nothing else, just use that?
Well, I cannot in good conscience recommend anyone self-edit, ever.
Okay.
I have done a little bit of writing,
Okay.
and I have always had and these were sections for other books.
Okay.
Not anything with Onyx, but a couple other publishers. And I don't edit my own stuff, ever. They usually have somebody else do it. So don't self-edit, just don't. I mean,
Okay.
you've read it so many times by then, you will miss something. You will see what you want to be there, and then that's just not good. As far as price, I mean, I do not edit for free. I just don't. This is a passion, but it's also a revenue stream.
Yes.
And I do know that with Drive-Thru RPG there is royalty sharing, and I think that can be modified. So work with your editor on that, with whoever you want. If you're going to have a friend edit and they have the skill for that, tell them, don't be my friend when you edit it, be my editor. So if I've made a hugely awful mistake or just the wrong there, tell me. So yeah. Oh, and the other thing, as an editor, I always use track changes.
Okay.
So have them do that, because I don't like to do anything to anyone's work that can't be undone if they don't like it.
Well, thank you so much for your thoughts regarding that. So what else are you doing at GenCon this weekend?
I'm running games for the IGDN. I ran Afterlife by Angry Hamster Press. I ran Ninja Crusade by Third Eye Games. And Sunday I'm running Wild Skies by Wet Ink Games.
Oh, interesting.
And I'm talking to a lot of people, like wonderful people like you.
That happen to be carrying around microphones, and who nearly made several other people shit their pants when microphones came out and they're like, oh no, are you recording? The answer was no. So, as someone...
I shouldn't laugh because I felt so bad about that.
It is funny in retrospect.
Yeah.
Horrible at the time. Now, for our audience who is playing Mage or doing something in an urban fantasy setting, are any of those games you feel that you can say, hey, you're interested in Mage, maybe this is a game you should look at, and you can either grab mechanics, ideas, setting, or plot ideas for it and jam it in? I've heard
Part-Time Gods. Part-Time
Okay.
Gods, second edition by Third Eye Games. And full disclosure, I was the editor.
Okay. So we're putting a drive-through RPG link in our show notes. That's the important part.
That's a very good one.
Awesome. And I've heard a lot of buzz regarding Afterlife. Is that the Kickstarter game, or is that a different one?
Oh, it was the Kickstarted one.
Okay.
Yeah. I had the quick start to work with. We are going to be doing stretch goals. I didn't edit the core book. I will be editing the stretch goals. And I ran the quick start, and it was amazing.
Can you give us a quick rundown of what the game is?
You are dead. And
The audience knows this, but in the game, what?
So you have died. The boatman has taken you to the Tenebrous, and that is a very difficult place for your soul to survive. But you also don't know why you're here and not in the afterlife you thought you would be. So it's about the journey, regaining your memories, and reaching your requiem. The thing that the character fears most is stagnation and becoming one of the unrequited, the ones who have lost all memory and all hope. So it's a very interesting game. I'm really happy to have run it and to be a part of it.
It sounds like one of those games where you don't quite win so much as get closure.
Something like, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they'd have to look at the larger book and make their own determination, but yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Oh, neat. So you have a character, you have a bunch of characters, they all bought something really big, suddenly everyone's dead, you don't want to have to deal with Wraith, maybe you pull out Afterlife and your chronicle kind of continues in a certain way.
Possibly.
Carol, thank you so much for your time and for your work editing the books that we all love. If we're
thank you.
interested in seeing what you've done or hiring your services, how can our audience do that?
My site is Carol Darnell, all one word, .wordpress.com, and my contact information will be in the show notes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol. This is Terry Robinson with Mage the Podcast. I am doing a walking interview with Matt Webb of Jackalope LARP. And so, Matt, what have you been up to?
Yeah, we're at GenCon. I'm seeing some awesome stuff. We're hanging out at the White Wolf booth, and we just did a big announcement for our big new Vampire 5th Edition continuous Living the World of Darkness LARP series, the Elysium Chronicles, that we just announced that are going to start next year, where we're going to have big sets of big blockbuster LARPs played throughout the country, one every 8 to 12 months, that each are part of a continuous storyline.
So with 8 to 12 months between them, that doesn't seem like a huge amount of plot is going to get through in a reasonable period of time for that. Is that going to be just weekends that are absolutely cram-packed, or are there going to be smaller events that spin out from that, or do you develop meta plot in between? How do you keep that story going with those kind of gaps?
All three, actually. So we have the big meta plot, or we have the big weekend-long events that move the entire plot forward, and that's like jam-packed, where you're doing historical scenes, you're doing role-play exercises, and when you buy a ticket, it's like an all-inclusive experience. Everyone stays at the same hotel, you get your meals included, all that stuff, and you get it all together. And then during the day, we're going to do workshops and historical scenes, and during the night we're going to go to these beautiful like historical locations. Like we're talking places like marble blind ballrooms and that sort of like Baroque sort of experience, the kind of places that might have always wanted to do Vampire the Masquerade in but never really had a chance.
Oh, fascinating. Do you have venues in mind or cities that you're looking at?
Well, I can't say anything right now. It's definitely it's not going to be in Texas if we can help it. We don't want to do that. We want to spread out. We probably want to do someplace. We're looking at places like Atlanta, Chicago, Philadelphia, those kind of places. But it's a matter of is the timing right, is the price right, But we also want to make it someplace that it's cool, It's that you go in and it's something that's beautiful, and that's really what we want to do.
Oh, neat. So if people are interested in keeping track of that or interested in possibly participating, how can they follow your work there?
So go to ElysiumChronicles.com and you can sign up for our announcement page, or you can, of course, follow Jackalope Live Action Studios on Facebook or on Twitter at Jackalope LARP.
Awesome. That's also going to be in our show notes if you didn't write that down quite. So one of the things you've been doing at the convention this weekend is, the convention being GenCon, is working or at least being present at the White Wolf booth. What have you been doing there?
I've been mainly looking at their board games, and also, it's fun to see people came by to actually say hi. They recognize me. A lot of people have been recognized Jason Carl from LA by Night. And there's been LA by Night cosplayers that came by, which is fantastic.
What is LA by Night, and who is Jason Carl?
Jason Carl is the storyteller of LA by Night, which is a Twitch show, much like Critical Role, except for it's Vampire the Masquerade.
Okay.
And fantastic. I highly enjoy it. It's on YouTube and on Twitch. and I highly recommend it. It's a great viewing. It's 3-hour shows, and it's a live play where they play Vampire the Masquerade around a table, and it's Jason Carl, who's one of the major developers of the World of Darkness brand. I'm not sure what quite his exact title is right now. He is one of the faces of White Wolf right now in Paradox, and he's a really great guy. He's honest in his passion for the World of Darkness material, and kind of one of the thought leaders about what it is, and he's a very good friend of mine.
Yeah, you and I were talking to him briefly about Mage the Ascension. He said some kind things about our podcast, which I certainly appreciated. But his other commentary was the problem with Mage is that it doesn't have a learning curve. It has a hockey stick. And that there needs to be a way for the game to allow you to be a neat guy who casts cool spells really fast.
Yeah, I think that, and that's where the storyteller comes in. The storyteller has to get you there and kind of protect you from the deep and the why and more approach it. It would be better if there was a more direct path to that. I think Mage of the Awakening did that. It made it much quicker to get to the cool person with spells, but I don't think it had the same depth and spread to back that up that Mage the Ascension has. It didn't have the deep idea behind it really in the same way. It had what was a very straightforward conflict between you and the High Masters of Atlantis, or I forget what they're called.
The Exarchs.
Yeah, and it has something going on there. It was much more Jim Butcher-esque, I think. But I think that lacked the kind of intellectual tension that marked Mage the Ascension that makes it kind of a thinking man's RPG to this day. And so, it's much more accessible. I mean, it's this beautiful door to this lovely place to a very small room. And Mage the Ascension has trenches and pitfalls and barbed wire around it.
And everything's booby-trapped.
Right, everything's booby-trapped. You get through the gate, and it's this vast expansive Elysian fields. And that's really the trouble. If we can get rid of the barbed wire, that would be great. One of my comments about Mage the Ascension is that your first storyteller, Chris McLaren was my first storyteller for Mage, and he's the one who made me love it, and it made me understand it. And your first storyteller for Mage, more than perhaps any other World of Darkness game or any other RPG, determines whether you love or hate it to an amazing extent. And I think it has to do with the penetrability of it and the fact that the breaking it down into these core concepts kind of falls to the storyteller. And if they can do that, it's a love affair for life. If they can't do that, it seems impenetrable and silly.
I have seen various publications you've mentioned where you were interested in doing a Mage the Ascension Discord chronicle or online chronicle of some stripe. And we had spoken before that if there were to be a Mage 5th edition, that you thought it really needed to be pared down. When you're working through your online chronicle, do you consider that to be a venue for you to test drive what you think a viable way of taking the franchise forward would be?
Either that or simply indulge my power fantasies of being able to define a Mage 5th edition line. I would absolutely love to do actual LARPs and stuff like that of Mage. It's just with the Elysium Chronicles coming up, it's going to be very, very, very solid.
We were just talking about your desire to indulge in the power fantasy of running a large online chronicle and test driving your version of M5.
Yeah, I mean, it's just mainly it's also a way of playing with people who are my friends from around the country and so forth in a way that I actually get to play a character. This is not a major project. This is just the place I want to go with and run Mage how I want to run it, and maybe do a little bit of fun stuff with it that's away from these giant high-pressure projects that I love doing. Elysium Chronicles, don't get me wrong. I do love doing The Night in Question, but the visibility would be very much this is a group of people who know each other doing something really cool and engaging. And because I had the idea of doing Eclipse as this massive LARP, and maybe one day, but now I'm trying to create a playground where I can play with ideas and see how it works, because I think the most powerful thing a game designer can do is put out ideas and then see what people are doing with them. I think one of the real strengths of Vampire the Masquerade, for instance, is, and especially in LARP, is they watched how people were playing and they started crafting things for how people were playing. They saw that as the most important piece of information.
There are a fair number of Mage books I have looked at where I said to myself, this is beautiful setting information, but I don't think anyone ever play tested it. It would be interesting to deal with people on the development side that were more actively engaged with how the community were operating.
Well, there's also so few Mage tabletops. It was very hard to see this kind of thing compared to like Vampire LARP or something. With Vampire LARP and Vampire the Masquerade, there was this huge feedback of where people found their fun and just increase the places where they found their fun. That would be the secret of all that kind of stuff. When we're doing that sort of thing, we have to turn around and we have to, when you don't have that kind of feedback, you have to go with what you find fun.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have to play around with the ideas of what's going. I remember somebody once said that we're not players, we're designers, and I'm like, I don't see how you can do that. That's like saying I'm a pitcher, I'm not a thrower. And I know that muscles are different, but you need to learn all these sorts of things to have happen. So,
what's the kind of scale that you would be looking for that? Is this like a 10-person thing, or is this a 70-person thing?
20 or 30 would probably be optimal.
Okay.
You know, I have a few people I'm going to invite to it, and then we'll see what we can do there. Because you have to start with a good base.
Okay.
That's one of the big things, is that you want to have a good base for all these sorts of things going on.
And you had made mention of the importance of culture, and you yourself are probably one of the most vocal advocates I have seen of getting rid of toxic people from the LARP environment and trying to find ways of making it more inviting. How do you feel that's turning out?
I mean, the problem is that I sometimes get so vociferous about toxic people, I become toxic about toxic people. And there's my paradox.
Yeah.
I can't tolerate bullies. I hate them. To quote my business partner, Steve Metz, I hate them with a passion of 1,000 suns, fiery red hatred of 1,000 suns. And, you know, it goes to the fact that I just can't tolerate that kind of behavior. And I can't tolerate people who use the pain of others for their own entertainment. And I mean, like, legitimate pain, right? I'm not judging any lifestyles there.
Yeah.
I'm just saying people who are everyday sadists or see how they gain importance is by tearing other people down.
Now, is that something where you feel in a text chronicle, if you were running it on Discord or something like that, that's not a big concern, or are there still things that people need to watch out for?
I mean, with online servers, it's great, especially ones that operate by individual accounts or so forth, because once you boot someone from the community as a keystroke, it's not like you're there in the same locale or anything like that. It's just like you're gone.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
It's kind of interesting, the fact that if you were to run a 30-person online chronicle, that probably represents a non-trivial number of the total worldwide population that is actively playing Mage in a tabletop or tabletop-like setting, which is
I hope not.
nice and also scary. I mean, I don't know. I look through some of these and I see people with very large book collections, and my first question is, do you play the damn game? Do you want the bacon off the top?
Sure, absolutely.
Sure. Take that and I'll take the rest
All
of it. Thanks, boss. We are sharing some lovely deviled eggs in the bar at the Omni Severin in downtown Indianapolis.
They're excellent. If you ever come to GenCon and you want a relatively quiet place to enjoy some good gourmet food. Gourmet. It's very, very nice hotel food.
Yeah. Matt had a nice interaction with the owner. I think they're getting drinks later. I think they're working on a writing project in the future sometime.
Either that or I'm just extremely friendly with people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the struggle of an introverted extrovert, an extroverted introvert. I can't remember which.
So have you made any advances in your setup for Eclipse? Last I had seen, you were reworking the traditions. Mm-hmm. And it seemed to be a case of taking what is core, indicating how it's been affected by modernity, and asking kind of a fundamental question of each. Like, I remember the last one, I think, was Celestial Chorus.
Yep.
Where I think the question you kind of boiled down to, and please correct me, was people want something to follow, but that doesn't necessarily map directly onto the idea of belief.
I think people believe in belief more than actually believe.
Okay. So you've been spending a lot of quality time at the White Wolf booth.
Oh, yeah.
What there have you found interesting?
Hang out with Mats, who's actually the board game guy for White Wolf. Paradox, in general, actually, has been great. He's this, I believe he's Swedish, and he's got a curly mustache, and he's really great at teaching people games. So I've been playing this great game called Vampire the Masquerade Vendetta.
Okay.
It's by HG Games, and it's coming out. And what it is that it's based on Chicago by Night, which is the new Onyx Path Vampire 5th Edition supplement. It's got a really great flavor. It's very short, card-based, like bidding for allies and influence in the city of Chicago. And I just like I like how much it captures the flavor of each clan, where you have these special little clan decks. And I think that's the real challenge in World of Darkness, board game conversions, and in all sorts of conversions, is capturing the flavor of these groups that we put in all the games and making them seem unique and different. So they do a lot of good stuff where, like, if you play the Toreador deck, it's all about turning people's allies against them.
Okay.
And using influence and all that. If you play the Tremere deck, it's all about messing with people's blood pools. Play the Bruja deck, it's all about direct conflict. So they actually, without saying what they're doing, because the worst thing you can say in a rule set is say what the purpose is of the rule. It should manifest normally.
But this is a case where it seems like there's very little ludonarrative dissonance, where there is very little gap between the theme and the mechanics.
Right, and it feels like you're playing a Tremere.
Okay.
Because it's like, yeah, you can do this, but I boil all your blood away and stuff like that. It's all very nasty and tricky, as opposed to the Toreador, which is, this person likes me more, therefore I get more power from it.
Get in there, presence. I was always curious to see if we will ever get spin-off properties for Mage. People talk about how impossible it would be to move Mage to other media. I don't think so. I feel like there would be a space for either a video game or a card game or a board game that was a more strategic or operations level view of the Ascension War, where you're an Archmaster taking a very long view of things and more or less nudging things here or there to kind of influence reality on almost a grand scale.
Well, the difficult thing, to give you a peek behind the curtain, is that
Dun, dun, dun.
board games want to make money, and the reason why they would license a product, because the mechanics can go any way, right?
Yeah.
You can slap the mechanics between anything. Settlers of Catan has proven this 1,000 times
Yes.
over. But what they want is to sell things through name recognition and through the fan base. So from a business perspective, Vampire the Masquerade has the best identification. World of Darkness is White Wolf way behind that. People know Vampire the Masquerade. They have much harder time with Werewolf. They have much, and Mage is way down there.
Yeah.
I mean,
We're
we're
a distant
fervent.
third.
Distant third. And that's nothing wrong with it. It's just from the perspective of a business person whose main job is to run board games.
Yeah.
Obviously, passion for the brand gets you a certain amount of way. They'll do it. But when you're doing the hard math, it's like, what will give me the best boost for my buck? Can I write this game about gathering and controlling nodes in the Ascension War? Or can I do it about controlling centers of influence in a city as a vampire? And I'm going to choose between doing the Mage the Ascension imprint or the Vampire imprint. What am I going to do in that case if I'm a smart business person?
You're going to leave it to the people like us in the fan community to try and produce something for Storyteller Vault that no one will ever play, and you will run with Vampire.
Harsh. Not quite what the answer I was going for, but the truth is within all that, those layers of salt.
I love a difficult baby. I understand that.
Oh no, I mean, the Mage is... There are books that English majors are the ones who try and read them, right? There are comedians who are mainly popular amongst other comedians. There are magicians whose talent and skill and finesse can only truly be appreciated by another magician, and they are poppers usually for this for the sin of being well made in that way that mainly appeals to people who are already in that world. And I think that Mage the Ascension is the storyteller's game. A majority of the great storytellers I know love Mage. That's the game they want to play. Great vampire storytellers I know want to play Mage. And there's just something about it, the way it like talks about the view of the world and all that. And I think that's poignant. I think that's very applicable.
I do think there are some themes to Mage, though, that conveniently mesh with the times that we live in.
Oh, yeah.
It is weird the degree to which the idea of reality became being malleable is no longer a thought exercise in a world with 24-hour cable news and Twitter bubbles and Facebook groups dedicated to conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
I also considered of the old World of Darkness lines the most hopeful. It could be 90 grunge dark, but it didn't have to be in a way that didn't necessarily line up with all the other lines. So I do think it has the one leg up there. Of the lines that could go through a metamorphosis, I feel like Mage is going to be at the top of that.
I love Mage. It is my first love, but it is not approachable in the same way that a vampire is, and it's all about limitations and the perils of hubris and all these other things, which I think are poignant messages. I just don't think it's ever going to have the same legs, but I think it's important to support. I mean,
and just because it doesn't have the longest legs doesn't mean we can't make its legs longer.
True.
It's as Jason Carl said, it's a hockey stick. I think as a community we can try and come up with resources that'll help shave that down a little bit.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that growing it and introducing people to Mage and all that. If you have a passionate storyteller, I talked about earlier about a storyteller. So much, you can have a fantastic experience with Mage. But there's also just where the market is and all that. And I think that Mage needs support and Mage needs love. And I think it's beyond even that, it's an integral part of the World of Darkness. And I think that what you're going to see is you're never going to see a Mage the Ascension game. You're never going to video game. You're never going to see a Mage the Ascension top level Let's Play. What you will see is throughout in Werewolf and in Vampire and all that kind of stuff, the role of the Mage is the one who can traverse all those worlds. The Seeker, the knowledgeable one, the scholar, the person who can stand up for himself, but is a bit of a loner. Mages are very, very often very lonely individuals. Cabals they often have very strident opinions about how to deal with them. And I think that makes them good wayfarers. They're excellent Greek choruses for the games that we have. And the mage idea, I think, is critical. And as far as like hope goes, light is meaningless without darkness. Darkness is meaningless without light. And I think that's one thing that the overly grimdark kind of vampire baby-eating stuff kind of misses, is that you have to have hope. One of my favorite phrases that comes from tvtropes.com is called darkness-induced audience apathy, wherein if there's no chance of success, you don't care. From the same word of warning, if you go to tvtropes.com, you've just lost your entire afternoon.
Yes.
But
they discover that everything you have ever thought of already has a name, and someone has come up with a comprehensive list of where it has appeared in media.
Absolutely, and my favorite thing from there is the 8 deadly words. The 8 deadly words is, I do not care what happens to these people. I think it's 8 words. It's something like that. 9 deadly words, sorry.
Or alternatively, you drop the I. Don't care what happens to these.
Don't care what these people. But what it is that's what happens in darkness. Notice it doesn't say I don't like these people. It's I don't care what happens to them, and that kills story. Like, you have to make me care. I think that was the big problem with The Walking Dead, is that they slowly, through the fact that nothing was ever stable, no victory ever lasted, all these other sorts of stuff, it got into darkness-induced audience apathy. It's like, why should I care about these moments? Because you're just going to destroy it, just because.
I like the Odyssey because I know Odysseus makes it home, not necessarily all in one piece, but he gets back. He meets with Penelope again. I liked the Anabasis by Xenophon because you know before you open it up, they make it to the sea.
But even if you don't know the ending, there needs to be the possibility. Yeah. If the author has established that they will destroy everything that you have ever built, and there's no trust between the author and the reader, that there's the possibility of half ending, however remote, and every victory, the victories are not hollow. You can actually make it. I think that is when darkness-induced audience apathy breaks down. And I think with Mage, it establishes that I think mages are the hope of the world, right? Changelings are the dreams of the world, right? Dreams and nightmares. They're the imagination of the world. Werewolves are the anger and the hideousness of the world. And vampires are death, but they're also history. The thing I like about vampires is that vampire is haunted by history. I think Vampire the Masquerade embodies the idea that history is a nightmare we're trying to wake up from. Nothing that happens in the vampire universe is not based on what came before. It is about trying to escape history and whether it's escapable.
And with Wraith, you run into the problem that it starts with the premise that it is unescapable. You're literally in the realm where it is nothing but what has happened.
Right. Wraith is about what made us what we are. That's what the great thing about Ghosts as a story is. It is the summation of a life, and that life is over.
Yeah.
So it's analyzed in total. I don't know if Wraith is the best execution of that, but that's the great thing about a ghost story, is that a ghost is in sum, and that life can be judged.
And that very much became the motif of both Mummy the Resurrection and now Geist the Sin Eaters, who I think took that and ran with it and put it in a setting that was much more accessible. Stygia is a beautiful place that I want to see pictures from, but I certainly don't want to visit, and I sure as shit don't want to live there.
I have not played it, but apparently Wraith 20 addresses a lot of this.
It does. And internally playable. It is hard to have a setting with constant peril, and that goes into another case of it is hard to modulate that such that players aren't constantly dying or they never feel the threat of the world around them.
Right. But winging back to Mage, right? Mage is about whether we can make a better world, and it's about the trouble of that statement. We've talked at length about how I think the technocracy is de facto doomed to produce horror because of this approach to the thing. It creates systems without soul, and that will always, and it prioritizes things over human suffering. The dream of a better world is both a necessity for life and the most terrible tyrant. The dream of a better world has been on the lips of every mass murderer and tyrant in history and has haunted them. And so at the same time, without the dream of a better world, what are we doing? Right. So the constant question at Mage is, I have hope, but how far am I willing to go for that hope, for control? And how much am I willing to trust in my judgment? Everyone's the hero of their own story, some villain of history in their bunker, in their castle, is what is going to be remembered as the heroes, the forces of light, batter down the gates. The off at the end is they take their own life or whatever. To be in that head and to hear them talk about, probably think to themselves how unfair they're being treated, how unbegotten, how their choices were the choices they had to make. To look at that, to be in that brain of somebody who is evil in all sense of the words, who has killed and engineered the deaths of so many and has changed the world, right, in the process of doing so. And to see them be in that moment where their world is crashing around them and to listen to what was ever going through their head about how justified they are and how they just wanted a better place. All of them. Every last one of them.
I always feel as if the downfall of any philosophy is anyone who says everything would be better if everyone just did things my way.
It might be, but humans don't work like that.
Oh, indeed. Ergo, it being the downfall of every worldview that starts with that as a premise.
That's the great political question, right? Is that what if someone says no?
How do we come up with a method of justice?
Right. Collectivism in general, all of its forms, always has this problem. It's just like, well, we're all going to do this. All right. What are you going to do if someone says no? Not just no, but I'm going to take steps to make sure that you cannot simply take what you want from me, or I'm not going to comply with this. What are you going to do? Because at that point you have to deal with the question of violence. That is the...
Do we just hit the Max Weber definition of government, the monopoly on the just usage of violence?
Well, I actually consider Max Weber to be silly because he doesn't cover things like the Castle Doctrine or something like that.
Okay.
Right. Like, there's entirely operating systems of governance in which every individual has the right to engage in violence, but it's a definition of the right to engage in violence. So government is, by definition, the group, the body of people who defines the terms in which violence can be used.
This has been a lovely conversation, Matt, but you have important meetings, and I don't, but I'm going to say that I do.
You have a con to enjoy.
I do have a con to enjoy.
Which is a privilege which you should indulge in.
It's been a hoot. I've been to a lot of conventions, and this is the only one where I wake up and I start doing things, and I stop doing things, and then 15 minutes later, I'm asleep. There's no 90-minute breaks in the day. There's not a...
Yeah.
It's kind of wall-to-wall stuff.
Yeah.
So just as a final note, where can people interested in your activities follow along? And as a sideline, Matt is an excellent leather worker. He did a custom commissioned dice tray for me that is Tyrian, this gorgeous Tyrian purple with the entropy symbol on it. And it's great because when I roll, it only rolls 10s. It's pretty great.
Well, I had to spend a lot. You're going to have to recharge that soon.
It wasn't cheap. Yeah,
you have to recharge that with quintessence soon. Yeah. So you might want to find a blood oak and leave it like by the roots for a few nights so it soaks that stuff up, and we should be fine.
That's how you got
that.
Good
Reliquary of... No, Reliquary is a nominate. What's the quintessence?
TAS.
Yeah. Well, no, the thing that holds all the quintessence, those things.
Oh, a periap or a matrix or a...
Yeah, periap. Get your antimatter batteries back charged up.
For those of you who are interested, Matt operates a wonderful Facebook feed for both Jackalope Live Action Studios and his personal projects, and it is always informative and interesting to follow. Do you mind if we share that with our listeners?
Sure, absolutely. On Twitter, I'm Jackalope LARP, and I'm Jackalope Live Action Studios on Facebook, and you can follow us also at jackalope-larp.com.
Matt, thank you so much for your time. I hope the rest of your convention goes well for you.
Thank you.
And that's the end of our GenCon interview series. Thank you to all of our guests for allowing us the time to talk to them. And thank you to all the fans who I got to speak with at GenCon. It was an absolute delight. If you plan on attending DragonCon in Atlanta, Midwinter in Milwaukee, PAX Unplugged in Philadelphia, give us a holler. I'll be at all of them. Terry out.